Welcome to the Abyssinian Syllabary, where we spell out Ethiopia in 33 characters. I'm Yves-Marie Stranger, your host and the compiler of these Abyssinian lives. Nota bene, while any resemblance to actual countries, past or present, and to historical figures is not purely coincidental, this is a work of fiction. For a primer on these Ethiopian characters, newcomers may start with the prologue by Manuel de Goes. To order the book or a poster of the Abyssinian Syllabary, visit Ethiopia.com. That's UTHIOPIA.com. The imagined life of Cornu de Lenclos, dodging the sticks, dodging the stones. When my wife and I begat our second child, a son, Chamichel seemed a natural choice as godfather, and here and how I now venture to call him by his Christian name, for he and I had become, despite our deep differences in temperament, age, background, and proclivities, the best of friends. We shared a country, Ethiopia, where I was to go on to live for some 15 years. I recall him well in the wafting incense of the church of St. Gabriel in Addis Ababa. As usual, he made a composed appearance. He looked like a Sicilian padrino that day, decked out all in black, with a Borsellino hat and his still neat and now greying beard. A Sicilian don with a generous, albeit mischievous smile. Mess with the bull, and you get the horn. Mephistopheles was never far away when Cornu de Lenclos sauntered onto the stage. There were many that found Jean-Michel's theatrics galling. As to myself, I only ever found them winsome. We travelled together to Gojam and to the monastery of Debre Work, in the footsteps of Addis Alemayo's Love Unto the Grave. Cornu was enraptured with a number of Semana work figures he said he had discovered in the book. Semana work being that refined Abyssinian wordplay in which one conceals a hidden message within words, stories that seem to be about something very different in the first, apparent reading. The stylistic form takes its name from the lost wax craft, in which gold is poured into a wax mold that is melted away to reveal the jewel hidden inside. In the rhetorical usage, the wax is the name of the surface meaning, while the veiled message is the gold within. Additionally, we travelled throughout France, to Provence, and to the Abbey of Ganagobi, where de Lenclos alluded to his hankering to retire one day to become the Hortulanus, and to Lozère and the Corbière. Returning to Ethiopia, we explored Kaffa, where we sought out the gravesite of Captain Clochette, and finally, during the summer of 2013, we boated down the Mekong in Laos in one last light-hearted digression. I have fond memories of him jotting down thoughts in moleskin notebooks for a book he said he ought to write on the hunting campaigns of the Duke of Orléans in French Indochina. Cornu de Lenclos was probably one of those who think that the 20th century was a mistake, while the 21st did simply not exist, I believe, save for the invention of narcotics and a few writers one could count on the fingers of one hand. Contemporary songwriters were the exception. He was forever querying me on the lyrics of Leonard Cohen and of Bob Dylan. And I do think that, counterintuitively, he would have cheered the latter's Nobel Prize for Literature. But if Cornu's life was a maelstrom of heterodox colour, his pronouncements were often uttered in black and white. He was never splenetic, yet he had a volcanic temper, and it was best not to lock horns with him over finer points of literary variance. He could be pedantic. I do not stand fools easily, he would tell me, a euphemism if there ever were one. He would frequently comment, "All of this is an encore," speaking of his life, which had been, he told me, a cornucopia of abundance and felicity. He would say as well, "I rather like the idea of suicide," an inclination he pronounced upon often enough for it not to be taken seriously. Another vestment in which he chose to drape himself, an intellectual foppishness, not dissimilar to his fitted waistcoat and ivory knob walking cane. He used expressions he had perhaps invented, or that had last been uttered in the time of François Villon, or perhaps from the mouth of one of the characters in Marcel Schwab's Imaginary Lives. Beard of a Godjamite unicorn, I can attest to having heard him explain to mark his appreciation of a fine dish or a pleasing book that he was polishing off with relish. Haile Selassie Yemut, upon the death of Haile Selassie, I once heard him blurting out, to the bemusement of a spellbound audience of farmers on their way to market in Ferasbet, near the top of Mount Kaka. He had few inhibitions, and was at ease with the body, his own and those of others. Not that he was ever a common horn-dog either. Cornu, for all his ostentatiousness, was no hedonist, rather remaining in all matters an Epicurean, that is to say, a man conscious of the need for restraint in all good things. He approached life as a materialist. He was down to earth. He was faithful in friendship, and once quoted Flaubert painting his best friend Bouillet as his left testicle. He loved puns, anagrams, and smutty wordplay. He had a penchant for Oulipian works, in particular the lipogrammatic A Void, 300 pages without the letter E, and W, or The Memory of Childhood, set in an Ethiopian island of that same name, W, located near Tierra del Fuego, both novels by Georges Perec. He was thrilled when I met him after a dentist's visit of his in Addis Abeba, because the dentist had been called Getachew. Getachew? Do you get it? He had exclaimed, and he had burst out with laughter, in spite of the anesthetic that had frozen his mouth. It did nothing to help his pronunciation, and Getachew has never rhymed with chew anyhow. Nevertheless, Chamichel would brook no objection, and was enchanted with the silliness of the pun. He limited himself, just like his publishing list, to everything. Cornu de Lenclos had become in recent years that French archetype, un Rambaldien, or, as the English would rather more dryly put it, be it in 2 words, a Rimbaud scholar. For myself, I preferred his earlier Flaubertian incarnation. Regardless, he was nothing of the sort. After several years studying the poet's papers in various unlikely places, the Vatican archives, Sufi Brotherhood ledgers, and after living in Harar for a year with his Ethiopian companion, the publisher and writer Sunudu Abebe, Cornu had written a pataphysics novel on the quandary of the poet, the mystery for these French ink-slingers being Rimbaud's foregoing of poetry to eke out a life hawking trinkets and reformed guns to the Kafirs of the Horn of Africa, or so the received version goes. Saint Rimbaud, doomed poetaster. Cornu wanted to get the story straight. He had discovered testimonials hidden in the Vatican annals, in which consociate traders displayed their admiration for Arthur Rimbaud, the astute businessman, an example to be emulated, and, what is more, a character who, far from being the monosyllabic figure of folklore, is well known for his wit and humour. What is more, the poet, a pederast of weak loins, as we all know, had fathered at least one daughter. Cornu de Lenclos had found pictures of both the woman and the poet's child. Making another startling discovery during his literary pursuit in Harar, Chamichel wrote to me, "Un poil plus du poète," another bristle from the poet's whiskers, signing off his email, "A que c'est bon ne," a name composed of fidèles of the Ethiopian Alpha Syllabary, which, transposed into French, read, "Ah que c'est bon," or "How good the goings are." He loved the story of Flaubert clambering to the top of the Pyramid of Cheops at dawn only to discover, pinned to the summit, the business card of one Ducasse, taxidermist in Bordeaux. However, if Jean-Michel Cornu was not a Rimbaldian in the classical sense, he certainly was a romantic, that is to say, a man who held that certain ideas are higher than others, that there is no higher calling than art, that literature is the art above all, and that to make a life out of art is an art in itself, and that therefore the figure of the writer striving to make art of his life is the highest calling of them all, which may come across as a wee bit French, and decidedly 19th century. Let us say that, for Cornu, life was at once a daily Promethean struggle in which man and woman enlarge and reveal themselves, and a performance art that should not be taken too seriously. To Cornu, at best, our lives were so many books. He placed his love of liberty above all, and approvingly cited Cyrano de Bergerac's refusal to serve any master. He loved de Bergerac's comical history of the states and empires of the moon, so much so that he reread it every year. Cornu declared to have made his own the Champfortian maxim, "Take your pleasures and provide them to others as well, without hurting neither yourself nor these others." Therein lies, I believe, the only moral we should ever require. Cornu de Lenclos was, and it does not diminish him to say it thus, a footnote to the Philosophie des Lumières. There was never anything better to do than pick up, once again, Montaigne, Diderot, or Casanova, and, of course, preferably in the Pléiade editions. I can still make him out, draped in an enormous blue towel, resembling some gleeful Socrates sprawled out over a chaise longue, busy taking notes and chuckling to himself as he lay thumbing Casanova's memoirs at the Hilton swimming pool in Addis Ababa. This cosmopolitan watering hole was Cornu's Quartier Général in Addis. He spent many a leisurely afternoon there, thrashing about in the thermal waters. I would find him steeped in the pool, engaged in philosophical banter with dapper Abyssinian gentlemen of a certain age. He would mollify them with the Chan simile of the finger and the moon before stunning them with Chuang-Tzu's butterfly as they happily bobbed about together in the tepid waters. His sparring partners did seem at times slightly dazed, and I would often scold Cornu for playing them for fools. But he would disarm me, saying, "Mais mon ami, voyons, you have to understand that I am laughing with them." Cornu always found me rather straight-laced, I am afraid, and would often refer to me as son ami britannique. One should not see in his poking fun of Ethiopians a sign of contempt. Far from it. For Cornu valued differences before all else, perhaps. He would often muse on Montesquieu's interrogation, "Comment peut-on être persan?" How can one be Persian? A seminal question of identity, a work of speculative fiction that contrives to use the voyage of two travellers from Ispahan to make a critique of the Moors of Europe. Unfashionably, Cornu believed in innate differences between cultures, and yes, perhaps even between what he would not have shied away from calling races. He said that he liked his Ethiopians to be Ethiopian, just as he preferred that his Norwegians be very Norwegian. If one can take exception to this discriminating approach, one cannot find it lacking in interest for the particularities you are sometimes lucky enough to encounter in foreign parts. Cornu called this the genius of place, and bemoaned its fast erasure in a day and age in which one could find oneself transported, as if by a magic Persian carpet, to the ends of the globe by Google Earth. Which is why, he said, he had had to find mitigation in the past in what Victor Ségalen called the second declension of exoticism. Cornu constantly returned to these sources, rereading his revered Chamfort, Rétif de la Bretonne, and his Rabelais, Flaubert, Stendhal, and all the writers of the French Grand Siècle, as well as the encyclopedists, without forgetting the Germans, Novalis, Hölderlin, and even those stuffy Brits. He had a marked affection for Swift, and for Bacon in particular, and was, in my eyes, surprisingly keen on Henry James. For all these playful bookish pursuits, Life remained a hoax underscored by a punchline from which we were never expected to recover. Jean-Michel Cornu de Lenclos played out his life between these two opposite poles. He was very proud of the medal of Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres he was awarded at the French embassy in Ethiopia. After the solemn ceremony, we went to drink some mead in a shebeen where the drunks ribbed him about his medal. Acts of bravery, he imparted to them. I dodged the sticks, I dodged the stones. As to the words, oh, the words, they found their mark all right. He revelled in finery, in linen shirts and bespoke shoes. He professed to abhor T-shirts, and that is the very word he used, which does seem on the strong side. He could happily bed down for the night in a flea-ridden $1 hotel and would treat the illiterate waitresses as if they were literary princesses. He may have been extremely fastidious, but he was never dull, if quite often plain wrong. I cannot say that I knew him the best, or that I was conversant with all the aspects of his multifaceted personality. Besides being at times expansive, gregarious even, Cornu de Lenclos was no open book, nor was he a man much given to airing grievances. Unless, of course, if these recriminations were comical, and, even better, if the laughs were to be at his expense. He was forever bubbling with new ideas, sharing insights on books he happened to be rereading. The last time we met in Ethiopia, in the retro Buffet de la Gare d'Addis Abeba, with posters extolling the country's 13 months of sunshine and 1970s gyrating disco balls. Cornu had told me with gusto how he was planning a series of detective stories based around the Ethiopian capital. He painted the lead character as a blend of Rouletabille and Sherlock Holmes, with a shadow of Maigret, and told me that the detective would be, of course, of mixed Armenian-Ethiopian parentage, and have a bit of René Lace in him too. Cornu also told me of his plans to pen an essay entitled The Art of Travel in the Age of Mechanical Transportation. But, in the very end, when the exit from the stage loomed, all that was found in Cornu's room was a scrap of paper on which he had hastily written out the words Là-bas, which is the title of Huysman's second most famous novel, and means down there, or perhaps out there. All I can say is that I thoroughly enjoyed the friendship we shared for 15 years.